Children will, as in Plato's Republic. In Plato's Republic, by the way, we'll get into the Orphic tradition at some point. He was really big into the Orphic tradition, but Plato was another one of these ruling elite stooges. If you've ever read Plato's Republic, it's possibly one of the, actually most contemporary ancient forms of political documentation on, sterilizing us, promoting feminism, equality, all these other poisons of our modern day society. And I'm not saying that some forms of equality for people watching on YouTube are necessarily bad, but the fact of the matter is, there's a difference between having equal rights, which I think the equal rights should be for people who are actually born of a nation, people who belong to that nation. They have the rights. It's like if you own a house, you have the right and say of what happens to that house. So yeah, there's a certain extent in which I agree with it. But the fact of the matter is, they want to convince people that nature doesn't exist, that everything is all subjective, that you can make anybody into anybody else. There's no genetic factors that affect anything. Because the fact of the matter is, nature is a hierarchy. There's better genetics, and the better genetics are supposed to win out. Eugenics, which means good genetics, actually takes place whenever people successfully breed with the people that they're supposed to breed with, whenever people naturally choose people, whenever people aren't forced into these situations to where they're, pitted with the lower classes. Like, for instance, in the modern day, they cushion everybody. They basically domesticated us. I'll talk about this for a bit. In our current situation, we have been domesticated with technology and government handouts and these communities for so long that nobody can support themselves and their families without somebody stepping in and helping them. You should be able to survive by yourself. I'm not saying that you want to survive by yourself, but you should be able to do it. Modern day society, we can't survive if a light switch goes out. And that's an exaggeration, that's a hyperbole. But the fact of the matter is, no technology, people will kill each other. I guarantee it. And they know this. So, we are useless, essentially. I mean, H.G. Wells wasn't completely wrong, but they have made us this way. It's a bit of a scary thought. I sort of forgot where I was going with that. But I'm going to continue with this quote nonetheless. Anyways, Plato's Republic, very tyrannical book. So children will, in as Plato's Republic, be taken from their mothers and reared by professional nurses. Gradually, by selective breeding, the congenital differences between rulers and ruled will increase until they become almost different species. You know how the ruling elite say that they're basically a different species from us? They're not wrong about that. The fact of the matter is, most people don't realize how accurate they are about that. Why do you think they don't care about us? They are not the same people. They're basically a different type of animal. Highly intelligent animal compared to the other animals, but an animal nonetheless. And I'd say that, with how unempathetic they are, they're a little less moral than us too. I say a little, I mean a whole lot less moral. Anyways, a revolt of the plebs would become as unthinkable as an organized insurrection of sheep against the practice of eating mutton. He is comparing the ruling elite to people who eat animals. He's comparing us to animals, and an insurrection of us would be like that of sheep against the practice of eating mutton. And they call us sheep all the time. They constantly refer to you as sheep. All the time. He says the Aztecs kept a domesticated alien tribe for purposes of cannibalism. Their regime was totalitarian. So he's actually recommending that we go to the Aztec standard. And I would argue that was introduced later in Aztec culture. But the fact of the matter is, it did happen. They ate and cannibalized foreigners. So, he's saying the ruling elite will basically become a separate species, that we're like sheep, and to resist them, it would be as unthinkable as a sheep organizing an insurrection against the practice of eating mutton. We are constantly trying to tell this information to people. I've tried to tell people several times in my day-to-day life. I've tried to reference these quotes. I try to reference what's going on. They don't care. They don't want to listen. They just want to bury their heads in the sand. The fact of the matter is, they literally think about you as cattle or animal to be eaten and cannibalized, and they think about themselves as a different species. It's not even offensive to say that the ruling elite are unhuman. And when we say that, they are actually genetically separating themselves from the rest of mankind. They are a different species. They are not like us. They have no reason to care about us or to become attached to us. We're like video game numbers to them, like sending a little army to go off and fight a war with the other little group of people. But we're even better than that because they could feed off of us. And then Bertrand Russell continues by saying, the laboring class will have such long hours of work and so little to eat that their desires would hardly extend beyond sleep and food, the upper class being deprived of the softer pleasures both by the abolition of the family and by the supreme duty of devotion to the state. So, what do they want here? Well, the fact of the matter is, people didn't used to work for 40 hours a week like we do, if not more, which oftentimes I end up working more than that. People didn't used to have that. Why do they promote this? Why do they want us to work so much? The other point of this isn't necessarily that they need us for labor. It's just that they want us to be so tired and exhausted by the end of the day to even afford the basic necessities of life that we can't even, have the energy to revolt against them. I mean, I even feel this way after work. I feel very tired sometimes after working very long days. And then by the time you get to researching this stuff, which I do constantly, I do it even at work, not gonna lie. I listen to a lot of things at work because, you can't read at work, and I read when I get home and I listen while I'm at work. So this to me is like it's full-time job as well. I put a lot of energy into this, and yet I'm about out of it by the end of the day. And then on top of that, I have a family to support. I got a bunch of housework I gotta do. It's a mess. And I know I'm not the only person like this. Other people are doing this. Other people are barely surviving, and they want to distract us and keep us so exhausted that we have no energy to do anything against them. Yeah, maybe we should. Maybe we should. At least go out in public, talk to people. They're not always going to listen, but talk to people who are receptive. Some people, their ears might perk up when they hear some of these things, and they'll ask questions. But if they're not asking questions, if they're just going to argue, if they're not going to worry about the potential of, their lives, he's not wrong when he says they're like animals who are basically being led to the slaughter. Now, I don't want them to die. You don't want them to die. That's why we try to spread this information. But if people aren't receptive, move on to the next person. We need to talk to people and get this information out to people who will listen, because there are good people out there who deserve to survive and who deserve to have a future. And they're trying to take our future from us, and they're trying to take our children's future and our children's children's future, and they're trying to wipe out our entire memory to where nobody remembers what's going on or, who our ancestors were. A lot of things are missing from our past. Do you think we know everything about the ancient Greeks? Do you think we know everything about the Egyptians? Maybe the ruling elite knows everything, but I can say I don't. I can say a lot of scholars don't either. There's a lot of speculation, and they're always learning new things. But has it occurred to people that maybe that knowledge is mostly lost because people didn't preserve it? Oh, yeah. And then aside from that, he wants to abolish the family because the family is what you have. Like, you're only living for the here and now if you're not living to preserve your children's future. And your children are the only way that your memory actually extends past this life. And when you actually think about it, when you have a child, he preserves your memory. He has your genetics, things that you write, values that you teach him. If you're a good parent, he's going to want to spread, and he's going to look up to you, and he's going to want to be like that. But that's not going to happen if you don't get married, if you don't have a family, if you can't reproduce. Your memory is wiped off the face of the earth. And they get exactly what they want. And also, if you don't have a family, just like he says here, the state becomes your family. Sort of interesting, because we talked about Akhenaten a little bit. And what did he change about the ancient Egyptians' culture? He made them, in their private households, what was it? He made them do worship in their private households, but in the temples where people were supposed to actually do worship, instead of having private pictures of people, which were removed from households because they were replaced with worship of his god, in the main temple, he collectivized everybody and showed scenes of mundane public life. There was no individuality, which isn't what this is necessarily about either, but there was also no family. No personal connection to anyone. No sense of meaning or group, because once everyone's the same, you lose the concept of what it is to be a people. I'm going to go through the... I'm going to continue through this quote, and then I'll look through the chat real quick. I do not pretend that birth control is the only way in which population can be kept from increasing. There are others which one must suppose. Opponents of birth control would prefer... that seems a bit odd. There are others which one must suppose opponents of birth control would prefer. Yeah, he's trying to make it out that people who oppose birth control want other types of population control. I don't want any population control. I think that people should be able to regulate their own lives and be with their own people and their own families, and to be happy and to live happy lives and to actually have a future. So he continues, war, as I remarked a moment ago, has hitherto been disappointing in this respect. But perhaps bacteriological war may prove more effective. If a Black Death could be spread throughout the world once in every generation, survivors could procreate freely without making the world too full. And this is interesting, because if you look about every 100 years around the 20s, there's a major pandemic.